from the, yeah. Yeah, I have different virtual backgrounds depending on the kind of class or meeting that it is. And to me, if we're talking about spirituality in Judaism or meditation, this seems very appropriate.
It sort of almost embraces you the way you're sitting, and its placement in the way you're sitting.
Yeah.
We're going to start now. We are on Facebook, and this is our last class in Neo-Hasidism, taught by Rabbi Weeder. And just briefly, sort of we got, origins of the Neo-Hasidic movement in our first class, or what Hasidism in general, and what we were trying to reclaim. Last week was really some of the leaders who founded the movements, who've been inspiration to people like Rabbi Weeder. And now we're going to talk about how that translates into some of the practices going on today in certain communities and meditation. And so we're good to go.
Great. Great to see everyone. So, yes, so thank you, Rabbi Marcia. That puts a little bit of context for where we've been for the class. And the reason why I wanted to specifically focus on meditation within Jewish tradition, especially within this period of time that we're now calling Neo-Hasidism, is because I believe that it's really a kind of core element of this new Jewish spirit, new old Jewish spirituality and practice that we've been engaged in. I think we could certainly do a whole class on nigunim, on using sacred melody and music. I think that would also be very much a part, but that's I will let a cantor lead the class on nigunim. So I think the place to begin to try to talk about meditation in Jewish tradition is first, what is meditation? And I think we can really aim at least how it's viewed in Judaism from the word hitbodedut. So some of us may be familiar with hitbodedut as a particular practice that comes out of the Bratslav tradition, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, 19th century, where one goes out into the forest and just pours their heart out to God. But hitbodedut is actually a word that has a larger umbrella than that specific Bratslav practice. It really comes from that root word lavad, mean alone or to be alone. So hitbodedut is it is really a self-reflective word, an inward turning word that is about being isolated or turning one's attention inwards. So the tradition in using hitbodedut in general to describe meditation is really referring to what a lot of us think about when we think about meditation, which is closing our eyes and being silent. And that's not to say that there aren't other ways that we can engage in meditation, whether we're walking or moving or exercising. But here in the Jewish definition, at least as it's been classically brought up, it's really about turning one's attention inward alone. So between the periods of 1997 to 2000, I worked as the assistant director for a Jewish meditation center in Berkeley called Chokhmat Halev. And some of you may be familiar with Chokhmat Halev. It's kind of a Jewish renewal-ish synagogue now, full community. But when it started, when Avram Davis and Nan Fink-Geffen founded it in 1996, it was really meant to be an educational center and specifically a meditation center where we brought teachers from all over the world, from the United States, from Israel, to offer programs in meditation, in Jewish meditation, and offered lots of ongoing practices and learning in that. The thing that's significant is that we held 3 large meditation conferences in that time between 1997 and 2000. And one of the things that we started to do in the last 2 meditation conferences is we had a day after the conference. So the conference went on the weekend, Friday through Sunday, or maybe it was just all day on Sunday. But then we kept the teachers around on Monday to just meet privately and talk about this field of Jewish meditation. What is it when we look at what each of these teachers are teaching all around the country and Israel, and we're talking people were at those meetings like Sylvia Boorstein and Rabbi Alan Liu and Rabbi David Zeller and Label Wolf Chabad from Australia and various feminist Tirza Firestone, a whole range of people coming from kind of Jewish Buddhist roots, coming from kind of classical Kabbalah, learning from all of it. Everybody came, and really the day was to try to open up to this field. What is the field of Jewish meditation that we're out there? What are people doing? How does it get articulated? What makes things Jewish and what doesn't? These are all the questions, because unlike yogic systems in Hinduism or Buddhist meditation practices through Buddhism, yoga and Buddhism have had this very clear systematic approach to meditation throughout time that's been able to be passed on from disciple to disciple, and certainly the meditation techniques and practices might vary from different regions from here or here, but for the most part, they have a common theme and they move forward in this. And yet in Judaism, it's kind of all over the place, just kind of like Judaism in general. There's so many different perspectives, opinions, places where people, so that was what a lot of our conversation was. And what I want to bring from that conversation, this was in 1999, and I think most of it still holds true, is kind of three main streams that we see now of what we call Jewish meditation. The first stream is meditation that is concretely grounded in Jewish sources and Jewish practices, meaning it is things that have been in texts, in particular texts that we've been able to come and bring forward. That's one aspect of this. It can be parts of, so we would just call that more classical meditation. And I had the opportunity when I was in Israel, first in 1994, to learn with people that were teaching those lineages and traditions. There's a big lineage that goes back in the Chabad tradition, and there's various other ones that come through some different streams. Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg in Israel, others. So that's one group, is people who and people who are teaching these more classical forms of Jewish meditation, for the most part, have been within more closed religious communities, Orthodox communities. But then there are those people who we might say are now don't really fit in any category, maybe straddling a lot of different communities, like Rabbi Zalman Schachter or Art Green or others that have studied these sources, are not in those religious communities anymore or at all, but are bringing it forward in for us to be able to experience. So that's one stream. The other stream is Jews who meditate with Buddhist meditation, Vipassana, insight meditation, and then take that meditative awareness and bring it to their Jewish practice, right? Okay, so this could look like being able to have a half an hour before davening, before a prayer, and the prayer leader leads an essential mindfulness Buddhist meditation, but then bringing that into to Jewish practice. And that also can then begin to infuse in moments of being engaging in Jewish practice, whether it's in a particular mitzvah or prayer or something like that, to be able to take this awareness of breath, awareness of the present, these Buddhist practice, and bring it into Judaism. And so that is another mainstream that we will see everywhere right now. And I think actually is a very authentic stream of what we now call Neo-Hasidism. Even though there's nothing Hasidic that is being brought forward by this particular stream, it's really a Buddhist practice that is then infused into Judaism. One of the things about Judaism, and more prominently about Neo-Hasidism, especially as it's been articulated by Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, is that Jews have always been borrowing from other spiritual and meditative traditions. And when we get a little bit into kind of some of the classical meditation traditions, and we look at the Rambam, Maimonides and his son and grandson, so much of that meditative practice that was happening in Egypt in the 13th century was heavily influenced by Sufism, by the Islamic mysticism, that those rabbis were hanging out and spending time with Sufi teachers in the same way that there are now rabbis and other Jews that are hanging out with Buddhist teachers here. And so that kind of influx, I believe, at least in looking consistently throughout history, is now part of what we're calling Neo-Hasidism, but is really an authentic stream. The third stream coming forward is, I'm going to say, is a little bit of a blend between the two. And it's a blend between the two. This is the stream of meditation that draws from Hasidic sources. It is people and rabbis that are opening and creating meditative experiences that are grounded in the teachings of Hasidism. Ideas like God is in everything, okay? And in my body and everything around. And so I, as a meditation teacher or leader, are now going to guide a group through a reflection, a meditative reflection on God being everywhere. Now, this particular piece here also fits with a Chabad tradition called Hitbonenut, which we'll talk about in a moment, but is something that people are doing, rabbis are doing, other clergy or leaders are doing now, even if they haven't been exposed explicitly to the Chabad Hitbonenut tradition. This idea of contemplating, sitting in silence, and bringing one's awareness to certain Hasidic concepts of non-duality, of God's presence, of awakening, is now becoming a major stream of meditation. Now, that person, that kind of teaching in that realm the teacher can be exposed to Buddhist practices of mindfulness, can be exposed to more classical, Kabbalistic, or Jewish sources on meditation, and are now bringing it into the moment in a new creative way. But the thing that really distinguishes this third piece is that we're having a authentic and Jewish, Hasidic inspired meditative practice that wasn't necessarily passed down in a lineage from one person to another, So so that's just kind of a little outline, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into each of these three streams to identify some of the components of it and how it goes. But before we do that, any questions about, let me just remove this, any questions about those three streams, or anything that you've experienced or been exposed to try to see like, well, where does that fit? We're going to try to get a conceptual frame for this. Marcia, did you have a comment or question?
I did. I had a thought about this because I worked with Yakub Heckelman. Well, Yakub and I grew up together. I knew him when he was Josh. And the bookstore in Jerusalem, Olam Katan, is very much involved in Sufi mysticism. And so I've had lots of conversations with Yakub about that. So I've been exposed to that. And I've certainly seen or practiced or experienced the kind of Buddhist meditation that borrows from that tradition and precedes Jewish tefillah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the fact that you just mentioned that, Marcia, I have to tell you, I also know Yakub. I've been to Olam Katan.
Everybody knows Yakub.
And actually, when I was doing my rabbinic thesis on the influence of Sufism to the Rambam, he actually pointed me to a lot of different sources that were really, really helpful. So just nice to make that connection. Rabbi Marcia?
Just wanted to share that I'll actually ask a question, which was the Institute for Jewish Spirituality a byproduct of those meetings in 97 to 2000? I mean, was one a direct, was that sort of the therefore from what you came together to study?
It didn't come directly, like the idea for IJS did not come directly out of those meetings, but there was lots of crossover, meaning that, one of the core people that helped kind of found and get IJS started on the meditative side was Sylvia Boorstein. Sylvia Boorstein, that's funny, you don't look Buddhist, she wrote. She's an amazing spirit, or amazing, and she is a Buddhist meditation teacher. She teaches at Spirit Rock. She teaches more in Buddhist settings than she does in Jewish settings, but she is in her neshama, in the deepest way, so Jewish, and really experiences spirituality through a Jewish lens, even as she's immersed in Buddhist teaching. So when IJS got founded with Sylvia, and the meditation component of IJS was Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, all came out of that Buddhist influence. So basically, and even at the IJS retreat that I was just at this last week, the clergy retreat, Rabbi Nancy Flam, who's also one of the co-founders of IJS, was our meditation teacher. And Nancy would bring forward, we had a whole teaching on the 5 Buddhist hindrances that went forward. And then we had another teaching on Jewish stuff. And she drew very much, but her influence of being influenced by Buddhism and then integrating that into Judaism was very much a part of her meditation teaching. So that kind of flow of being able to go back and forth between Judaism, Buddhism, integrated together is very much a part of IJS for sure.
Gotcha.
Okay, other questions? Sylvia and then Ellen Wool.
And then Rhea.
Okay.
You're on mute, Sylvia.
Yeah, Sylvia, just unmute.
Thank you. Might have been better. What I was going to comment on was that I have taken several classes at IJS, and the meditation that I've experienced has been a lot of Buddhist-like meditation. Some very helpful and not very good at it. Have something, but Hedera is the most amazing practice I have ever engaged in.
Did you say Heat Bodhidut?
Yes.
Yes.
So you mean in the Bratslav tradition of going out
Yes.
and talking?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, and if I can't get out to the woods, look out at the woods, whatever I can do.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, we'll talk more about that too. All right, Ellen, did you have something, Megan? No? Okay, so just Ellen and Ria, and then we're gonna move on, just so we can keep the contact going. Go ahead, Ellen.
I assume that meditation is more than just sitting on the floor and saying but I don't understand what you mean by meditation.
Great, great. So right now, for where we're talking, we're just speaking about being just the very definition of Hitbodedut, which is just being with oneself, more inward focused, spending time inward focused. What happens when we do that? We're not there yet. We will talk to that, because there's so many different places that one can go when one either closes their eyes or turns their attention inward. So I want to just affirm, Ellen, that the fact that that word meditation doesn't have a there for you right now is okay. We'll get there. All right, Ria.
Yeah. My husband and I in the 90s went to the summer camp with Zalman and the renewal program, which was so much more than having a meditative session. It was the music that developed from that. And even the prayer book that they put together became a large part of the Reconstructionist prayer book. And I never understood why the learning, the music, the inward look and the outward. In the last session we went to, Zalman Schachter it was sort of an he taught a class on elderling, about growing older and the relationship in a community with the elderly. And it was, and my husband really bonded with him. And I've never been with anything since then that was so fulfilling and so wonderful. And do they still have these camps in Pennsylvania?
Yes. Well, it's not necessarily in Pennsylvania, but yeah. So we spoke about this a little bit last week, 2 weeks ago, but what you experienced, Ria, one could call it the Aleph Kala. Aleph is the umbrella movement for the Jewish renewal movement. And every other year, they have a big gathering somewhere where there are lots of teachers and everything you experience. And what you experienced is really an immersion in a week of Neo-Hasidism. And more than that, because it doesn't just draw from Hasidic tradition, it also draws from more women-centered practices and other things as well. But what you experienced was, it wasn't just meditation, it was all kinds of ways of engaging Jewishly with ritual and life in a more meaningful way. And meditation, there were probably moments throughout that week that meditation featured. So thank you for sharing. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit. So let's go a little bit into these three streams. So when we get into kind of classical meditation, we have sources. I would say that there are a few different epochs where there was where we have record of more inward, contemplative, meditative kinds of practices, but not really necessarily proof of exactly what happened during that time. So, the first kind of big unflowering was really 2nd century Talmudic times that went kind of for a few hundred years. And these were two different kinds of mystic and meditative practices. One was called Merkava mysticism, where people were taking the vision of Ezekiel, the very psychedelic, wild vision of Ezekiel that we read in the first chapter, especially on the holiday of Shavuot, and began to look at each part of the image and experience of his prophecy as symbolic instructions about how to navigate and open to worlds within oneself. So, and worlds within the self being deeper and deeper openings into God. And so we have, so in all of that, there still are, I've experienced people that have said what I'm teaching right now is Merkava mysticism, and that it has a lineage back, but we don't have any kind of really specific instructions. This is what people did. Instead, we have more descriptions of different rabbis that engaged in the Merkava experience, whatever that was, and had also these visions of God, kind of like Ezekiel did. The second piece was something called Hechalot mysticism, and Hechalot means palaces. And again, this is where the whole prayer of the Kedusha is said to have come out of. That Kedusha prayer that brings those lines of Isaiah and Ezekiel with repetitions of Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. There's been some really interesting scholarship that has shown that it was that liturgy was never meant to be chanted the way that we do now, which is just to kind of rattle it off where there's one quick call and response with the congregation. But instead, the idea is that people would chant Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh over and over, and there would be a call and response, but it would be something more aligned to what some may be familiar as yogic or Hindu kirtan, where a sacred phrase is repeated and then somebody else then the group will repeat it back, and it will go back and forth with some drums and music. But Rabbi Abraham Abulafia, who was a mystic around the time of the Zohar in Egypt, really brought he claimed that was what they did back in the 2nd and 3rd century, and that's where that liturgy came out of. And that's one of the aspects of kind of classical Jewish meditation that we may know from more of the yogic term mantra, right? A mantra is a word or a phrase that is repeated over and over again. So this is one of the pieces in response to your question, Ellen, what actually happens in meditation? Well, this particular practice of mantra is the idea of repeating a word or a sacred phrase, a piece of liturgy, over and over and over again, whether one does that out loud in actually chanting, or whether one does that in their mind over and over, and that is something that begins to quiet the mind and help the mind absorb what it is that phrase is opening us to. So, example, we may, on the inhale, a technique could be in the inhale, and maybe we'll try this in a moment, that an inhale is Shema Yisrael, we say to ourselves on the inhale. On the exhale, Adonai Eloheinu. And on the inhale, Adonai Echad. Exhale, Shema Yisrael. Inhale, Adonai Eloheinu. Exhale, Adonai Echad. And we just do that over and over and over again. And the idea about repeating a mantra, and this one coordinates with breath, over and over again the mind has something to focus on. So after a while, the thoughts start to settle down, and then one becomes just absorbed with the message of the liturgy. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, God's oneness. So that mantra it started, according to Abulafia, in the early 2nd, 3rd century, and it's been a practice, and that's where the Kedusha came out of, but then was carried forward in many ways through many streams that you can find in Abulafian meditative practice and other things as history progresses. So let's try that for a moment. Just find a comfortable place to sit. Close your eyes. Just become aware for a moment in your body and space. And then on the inhale, say to yourself, Shema Yisrael. On the exhale, Adonai Eloheinu. The inhale, Adonai Echad. The exhale, Shema Yisrael. Just keep the loop going, each 2 words going with each movement of breath. And try to give your full attention to each phrase. You're breathing normally, you're not doing anything different, but you're just having the phrase go along with the breath. We'll just do this for about 2 minutes quietly. All right. So we won't take the time right now to hear reflections on it, but that's one kind of example, and you can feel kind of the peace that comes with bringing one's attention to the phrase of the Shema, but doing it in a repetitive way in silence. So that can happen either in silence or in a chant. A whole nother stream of what we'll say classical Jewish meditation is that of visualization and imagination. And my understanding of how this has been brought into Jewish practice has really been the influence of somebody who is not Jewish, a teacher of guided imagery and Jungian Jungian practices from Jerusalem, who's known as Madame Colette Apteker. That there have been many Kabbalists and Jewish, kind of more modern Jewish mystics from more of the Orthodox world, and some of them have branched out, but who studied with Madame Colette, studied the use of imagery for healing and meditation, and have brought and integrated those teachings into classic Kabbalah and Hasidut, because there was never a real lineage of passing on how to use imagery and imagery this way in meditation. In Judaism, we just have these kinds of, we have incredible imagery that's in the Zohar, but never and in Lurianic Kabbalah, but never a real way to, or a specific technique about how to use that imagery in meditation. So a whole group of teachers that Madame Colette trained in this kind of imagery have taken Judaism and some of these more ancient traditions and brought them alive through imagery. So some of her students have been Estelle Frankel, Reb Mimi Feigelson, Rabbi Yoel Glick, who wrote a wonderful book on Jewish meditation called Living the Life of Jewish Meditation. And in his book, Living the Life of Jewish Meditation, he has a whole chapter on guided visualization and kind of how he has brought that the classical sources through Madame Colette's teaching. So that's another stream, classical. Then there's another stream that is from the Chabad tradition called, and this is what Chabad tradition really calls meditation. They call it hitbonenut. Sorry, hitbonenut, from the word lehavin or bina, understanding, to understand. So hitbonenut is kind of this deep, a word to talk about deep understanding or contemplation. And so there are many different aspects to the Chabad tradition of hitbonenut, but the kernel of it is to take one phrase or one idea in Torah and just let the mind coalesce and hover around that question or that idea and be able to sit and meditate with it. So I'll give you an example. We're going to take the verse from Psalms, Harpu ud'u ki anochi Elohim, which very translates as be still and know that I am God. Right? That's the verse from the Psalms. Be still and know that I am God. So here's how a hitbonenut practice might look. Go ahead, close your eyes again. Bring your attention to your breath, to the body, to being right here and right now. And hold that phrase in your mind. Be still and know that I am God. Just let it hover there. You can visualize it if you want. And start to feel into the different parts of that verse. So be still. Really open to stillness. There's the stillness of your body not moving, but also open to stillness in the mind. Be still. Is there a place of deep, deep inner quiet? And know. Be still and know that I am God. Know. Who is the I of be still and know that I am God? Imagine that your every cell in your being, in every system, blood, bone, electric nervous system, every cell, every aspect of consciousness knows that it is the divine. Be still and know that I, every part of my experience and my internal nature is God, is infinitely deep. The mind wanders, just bring it back to that phrase. Be still and know that I am God. And let your mind hover around that sense of I as not being apart from you, as not being cut off from anything outside of you, but that I is the voice of the universe as it comes through you, as it's expressed through you, through what you conceive of you as you. Be still and know that I am God. So go ahead and take a couple of breaths, deep breaths. You can open your eyes. This is all just a little sampler, really not enough in this time to be able to really give us any kind of deep experience of what these practices have. But I just want to give you a little taste of what the direction is, and there's opportunities to explore more. So those are some of those classical pieces. Other things, other aspects we'll use things of Kabbalah, whether it's theories of the four worlds of Kabbalah or the Sphirot, and have different contemplations or reflections around those things that can be part of that stream of Jewish meditation. The second piece here, I'm not gonna, since this is not a class specifically on Buddhism, I just wanted to really outline what that second stream is of people doing Buddhist practice and then bringing that kind of deeper mindful meditative awareness to Jewish practice. That's one stream. And now there's a little bit of a third one, which is can be definitely influenced by that Buddhist practice, but is really trying to take a lot of these Hasidic, these classical Hasidic ideas, especially the non-dual one about God being in everything, in everywhere, Shviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, and being able to bring that into the moment of meditation. So we'll do one more with this, and I'll give just an example, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So go ahead and close your eyes again. And begin to connect with breath. Notice the beginning of where the air enters your nostrils or your mouth. Notice the way the body gently expands to make room for the inhale. And then follow the air as it goes out of the body. Notice the body in space, the pressure of your bottom on the chair, your feet on the floor, the distance between the bottom of your spine and the top of your head, the space between your ears. Notice your whole body breathing with inhale and exhale. And if a thought appears or a particular image, concept, notice that and bring your attention back to breath and body, to all the aspects of here and now. So right now, this practice is synonymous with mindfulness, Buddhist mindful meditation practice, or at least one form of it. And now, the phrase from the Psalms, Shviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, I place before me God always. The Baal Shem Tov translates shviti, I place, as from the word shaveh, or hishtavut, to make equal. So the Baal Shem Tov would translate, I see God equally in all things, always. So as you are aware of breath and body, become aware of breath as an expression of the divine, the life-giving force that is God breathing. And the sensations in your body, whether it's your shoulders or your belly or anything in your body, also equally an expression of divine presence. And the air that touches your face or the sound waves that hit your ears, also an expression of the one. And even all the thoughts in the mind that arise and fall and go away, each one also equally an expression of God. As you allow every part of your experience to be equally welcomed as divine presence, the sense of yourself as a separate being can begin to dissolve, and it's all just God. God as breath, God as sensation, God as sound, God as thought. And in a moment, we'll open our eyes and come back. And I encourage you to try to hold on, even as you look at your screen or feel your body in space, to this sense of God's presence being equally everywhere, always. So you can go ahead and open your eyes. So again, this is similar in some ways to the Heat Bonanut practice with that phrase, but the difference would be I would be holding in the Heat Bonanut practice, I would be holding more that that phrase, Shviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, as being kind of the way that my mind tries to open to all of this experience of being one with and everything being an expression of God, where here we took a core teaching from the Baal Shem Tov and used that as the springboard towards a meditative awareness and practice. And so again, the piece with meditation comes is, and it's part of the meditation that I teach, which is we become what we practice. Who is the kind of person that we want to be? How do we want to interact and relate to life? What's the perception of the world and ourselves that we want to grow into? What's the truth that we know in our hearts but don't always live in our lives? And meditation becomes a way to practice that, to be able to create a space, a mini Shabbos space where that we don't have the usual things we have to do and distractions, and we can just practice being in this moment the way that we want to be and grow into. And the more that we practice it inwardly, the more that as we move out and interact and are in the world, have a better chance of bringing that same kind of awareness. What is it like to begin to talk to people, our kids, our colleagues, our coworkers, and have this awareness? Shviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid. Have this awareness. You're part of the divine image. All this is what we want to grow into from a Neo-Hasidic perspective. So I'll stop there, open for any questions, comments. There's so much more to say and share, obviously, about Jewish meditation, but that can be a beginning. So I see Ria and Rabbi Marsha. Go ahead, Ria. You have to unmute.
So the concept, which really appeals to me, that we are part of the breath of life. We're part of God. God is with that. God is everything. And yet and we always think of godliness as good and worthwhile. And there's such evil in the world. And that, I mean, in Job, we asked the question, did God also create the evil? And it's part of, so in the breathing and being part of God and part of the everything, then we're also part of the evil.
So
And
yes.
it's disturbing.
Yes, yes. So this is what you're opening, Ria, is the big classic question, especially as we come into, and this is one of the reasons why people opposed, one of the reasons, at least theologically, why when the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene and really proposed this whole non-dualistic sense of God, one of the reasons why there was that resistance. And in fact, it was also some of the failed Messiah experiences of Shabbatai Tzvi and Jacob Frank were also people who delved into this teaching very, very deeply of non-duality. This was pre-Baal Shem Tov, but really almost condoned sins as that one could really engage in certain behaviors, but do it with kind of lifted up in holiness, and kind of use it to almost justify behavior that wasn't so great. Now, of course, they weren't doing anything like justifying murder or killing or those. It was mostly about having to do with sexuality, crossing boundaries, those kinds of things. But I think, one of the things I'll just say about this concretely is the liturgical phrase that we say every morning before the Shema, blessed are you, God, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech, Osei Shalom Uvorei Et HaKol. Blessed are you, God, who creates light and darkness, who creates peace and everything, right? Some of us know that that's based on a verse that was slightly different. The verse from Isaiah, which that's based on, says, God creates Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech, Osei Shalom Uvorei Et Hara. Blessed are you, God, who not only creates peace, but also evil. God, you create evil. So that's one of the, this goes even deeper than Hasidism. This is like a core Jewish piece. And in fact, in the Talmud, in the last chapter of Tractate Brachot, it has a whole amazing piece about how you have to bless the bad as well as the good, because the bad is also an expression of God. Very difficult stuff. When we start to get into evil, we start to get into human free choice and will, and how people can make actions that do not come from that place of unity and oneness and can come into destructiveness. How is that within God as well? That's one of these deeper mysteries, and we'll leave it at that. But definitely
but the thing is that I wonder, we always think of purpose. And so if we think of God as thinking as rational, or do we not? This is not rational.
Yes.
So it's disturbing.
Right. A lot of it is that we tend to view God through our own, obviously, our own experience as people. And as long as we start to try to open to God as a person, like we
Mm.
would to ourselves, it becomes very problematic. So part of, especially where the Rambam, Maimonides, was very strong about this, and we didn't get into his philosophical mysticism and what he and his grandson and son were practicing at that time. But he was very famous for what's called negative theology, which is that you can't ever say what God is. You can only say what
Right.
God isn't, as a way to open to something beyond what we know. And in this case, we're moving into that territory, and I would love to. I know it's problematic, and I'd love to spend more time on it, but I know that there's some other questions, and so hopefully you and we can all have more of a deeper exploration of that sometime soon. Rabbi Marcia, and then Sylvia.
I'll just say we'll take Sylvia's as a last question. This was excellent again, K'vod. You really I want to take a moment and just compliment you on how you've taken such a massive and complex amount of history, ideas, practice, and really distilled them in a way that even a beginner can begin to sort of understand and feel connected to. So it was just really it's been a remarkable session. And maybe what you and I can talk about is the next time you come back is really doing a series on Rambam's negative theology. That is not a class that gets taught very often and could be very, very exciting. When you feel you have time, we'll talk about that.
Great.
So I just want to say thank you. And I just want to announce that next week and the week after, Bex Rosenblatt will be with us, continuing governance and theology in the Tanakh. So I hope you'll join us. And after that, in March, we have we're going to have 2 sessions on sort of a deep history of Eretz Yisrael, taught by someone who used to be a congregant of mine, now more of a scholar, Rabbi Mike Myman. And we also are going to have some great learning with Rabbi Suzanne Singer in the spring. A lot of wonderful teachers are coming up. So I just stay tuned to what's happening with this course. And Sylvia, what did you want to share?
Thank you. Yeah, that's all good. I was just thinking that this is where Jewish teaching can intersect with secular teaching, because what I thought of when you talked about the evil that God has produced as well as the good was Carl Jung. Well, his famous teaching is that we all have a dark side and we have to go right down to the bottom to get back up to the top. But if we don't have some kind of grounding, what could happen?
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia. I'll just say one last thing before, because Diane brought out a really important piece in the chat that she asked is, she says, is there a possible tipping point at which practitioners might in effect depart from the practice of Judaism? Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one of the biggest fears that Jewish community has for kind of this mixing, and has always had throughout history, of what do we let in, what do we keep out, what is consistent with Judaism, what is out there. I mean, one of the things about, I think, what makes this Buddhist marriage, so good is because Buddhism is so non-theological. It really is, at least the way that Buddhism gets practiced in the West, especially as taught by Jewish teachers, who are some of the biggest teachers of Buddhism here in the West. It really is a practice of paying attention that doesn't get so much into theological realms, so it becomes an easy marriage. However, it's very clear that mindfulness is different from godfulness. It doesn't have to be in conflict with godfulness, but as far as a practice of what it is opening us up to, they're both complementary, but they don't substitute. They aren't substitutes for each other. So I think what's important is anybody who teaches Jewish meditation needs to have a real concrete grounding in Judaism, and has to know, has to have that be their primary source of wisdom, even as they are bringing in other forms and traditions to inform. So thank you, everybody. This has been a wonderful, thank you, Rabbi Marcia, for offering this opportunity and for everything that you do, and for ALI. It's wonderful.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you much.